Welcome back to the Riichi Mahjong guide. So in this video, we're going to be talking about the scoring system. There's a lot of kind of crazy stuff that goes into scoring a hand in Riichi Mahjong. Don't worry if it's a little bit too overwhelming. We're going to go over exactly how the scoring works, but I'm going to show you some shortcuts and we'll end up doing some examples in the next video. Okay, so when you win a hand, it's either by tsumo or by don. If you win by tsumo, then everyone at the table has to pay you based on the score of your hand. But if you win by don, only the player who dealt your winning tile has to pay you. And they have to pay you essentially the same amount that everyone at the table would have had to pay you in total. So regardless of whether you tsumo or ron, you generally get about the same amount of points. The rounding messes it up a little bit, but we'll get into that in a moment. So then, if you remember from my basic scoring elements video, the score of your hand is based on the han and fu value of your hand. If it's a Yakuman, it's going to be scored differently. We'll cover that in this video, but we won't be covering what actual Yakuman are until a later set of videos. But for normal hands, the first thing you do is count the han value of your hand. So that includes the han from all the Yaku and Dora in your hand. If the number of han that your hand is worth is 5 or more, then you don't have to count the fu. But if it's 4 or less, then you do. Hands that are worth 5 or more han are essentially limit hands, where the score of the hand is only based on the number of han, and these values are set and very easy to remember. Just going over them quickly right now, a 5 han hand is a mangan, which is worth 2,000 base points. A 6 or 7 han hand is worth a haneman, which is worth 3,000 base points. A hand worth 8, 9, or 10 han is a baiman, which is 4,000 base points. A hand that is 11 or 12 han is a san baiman, which is worth 6,000 base points. And a hand that is 13 or more han is a counted Yakuman worth 8,000 base points. A counted Yakuman is worth the same as a single Yakuman, which we will get into later. But in some rule sets, usually tournament rule sets, they don't allow counted Yakuman, meaning that any hand worth 11 or more Han would be worth a San Baimon instead. That just depends on the rules by which you play. It's not really important for the purposes of this video though, so we're just going to kind of brush over it. Okay, so I mentioned all these numbers. These limit hands are worth these certain amount of base points, and we're going to come back to that in a moment. Next, we're going to talk about how to calculate the base points for a hand that is worth 4 or less Han. For hands that are worth 4 or less Han, you have to calculate the fu value. And the fu and Han values of the hand go into this formula. You don't have to memorize this formula. I'm going to show it to you so that you know where the scoring comes from, but you don't have to freak out that there's going to be some math on your screen right now, okay? Okay, so the formula, as you can see on the screen right now, is the number of fu times 2 to the power of 2 plus the number of han. So before you put the fu value of your hand into this formula, you have to round it up to the nearest 10. Thankfully, because of that, it makes the base points of your hand a little bit easier to calculate, but it also means that not every little bit of fu might count. So if you get a hand that's exactly 30 fu, then every fu above 22 was essentially wasted. But if you get a hand that's worth 32 fu, it gets rounded up to 40 when scoring. So it's a good thing to know how this is calculated so you can plan your hand accordingly if you're going for a specific score. So essentially you start with this base of 2 to the power of 2, and then every han you add to that exponent will double the value of your hand essentially. And that's also why there's the limit hands of mangan and above for when you have 5 or more han. Since the value of this formula increases exponentially with the number of han, they kind of had to limit that in some way, otherwise the game would be ridiculous. Okay, so you just plug your fu and han values into this formula, and you will get the base points of your hand. If we just go with an example here, let's say that we have a 2 han hand that is 30 fu. So we have 30 times 2 to the 4th So 30 times 16, that's 480. So this 2-han 30 fu hand is worth 480 base points. And I just want to note here that if the number calculated in this way is more than 2,000, it automatically gets capped at 2,000. That's because any hand that's 4-han or less cannot be worth more than a mangan. So for instance, if you have a 4-han hand worth 40 fu, and you plug those numbers into the formula, that would give you a base point value of above 2,000. So it just gets capped at 2,000. There are also some rules that round up the base point value 1,920 to 2,000. And that is a rule called Kiviage Mangan. It's not really more common one way or the other. I guess with older series like Akagi, they'll use Kiviage Mangan, but in newer ones like Saki, they don't. For scoring purposes, it only makes a difference of about like 300 or 400 points, depending. It just depends on the rules by which you play. It doesn't really matter that much either way. So once you have the base points of the hand, you can figure out how much everyone's going to pay you. So if you are not East and you win by Tsumo, the player who is East has to pay you 2 times the base points of your hand, rounded up to the nearest 100. And then the other 2 players each have to pay you 1 time the base points of your hand, rounded up to the nearest 100. So with our 2-han 30 fu example, the player who is East would have to pay you 960 rounded up to the next 100 is 1,000. So the player who is East would pay you 1,000, and the other 2 players would pay you 480 rounded up to the nearest 100 is 500. So you would get 500 from each of the 2 non-East players, and you would get 1,000 from the player who is East. If you were to win by Don, then the player who dealt in would pay you 4 times the base value of your hand. So essentially they're paying for everyone. And so you multiply 480 times 4, you get 1,920, and you round that up to the nearest 100, so 2,000. So the player who dealt into your 2-han 30 fu hand will have to pay you 2,000 points. So that was pretty simple, right? It's a little different if you are East, though. So if you are East and you win by Tsumo, then everyone pays you 2 times the base points of your hand. So instead of just getting 4 times the base points of your hand, you're getting 6 times. So like I said, you do win 1.5 times as much as East than if you were not East. So with our 2-han 30 fu hand, we would be getting 1,000 points from everyone, as opposed to 500 from 2 players and 1,000 from East. And if we win by Don, because the rounding takes place after the multiplication, you multiply 480 times 6, that's 2,880, and that gets rounded up to 2,900. So you do get 100 less if you win by Don than if you were to win by Tsumo with this type of hand. But, I mean, that's just how the calculation works. So next we'll do a couple examples for a limit hand. We'll do the smallest one, a mangan. So if you are not East and you win a mangan hand, meaning a 5-han hand or a 4-han or lower hand that gets capped at mangan, the base points of that hand is 2,000. If you win by Tsumo when you are not East, you'll get 2,000 points from the other 2 players who are not East, and you'll get 4,000 points from the player who is East. If you win by Don, you get 4 times 2,000 points, so 8,000 points from the player who dealt in. And if you are East, you'll get 4,000 points from everyone if you win by Tsumo, and 12,000 points from the player who deals into your Don. So with the limit hands, it's pretty easy since you're just multiplying nice round thousands. But I'm sure you don't want to do math every time you have a 4-han or lower hand. So in practice, the way people get these numbers is from a scoring table. There are separate scoring tables for East and for not East, of course. And they do look a little bit intimidating. Don't be scared. You don't have to memorize them. In most cases, you're just allowed to have a scoring table with you to reference. Okay, so here's a scoring table that I pulled from the European Mahjong Association rulebook. They do not use Kiviage Mangan. So here's the scoring table for East and for other players. And then here's a scoring table I pulled from the World Riichi Championship rulebook. This one does use Kiriage Mangan, and it combines both the scoring tables into one. This is a more common and a space-efficient layout. So if you're more familiar with the game, you'll probably see scoring table layouts more like this. This scoring table does use Kiriage Mangan, so you'll see that for hands that are worth 3 Han and 60 Fu, or 4 Han and 30 Fu, they are rounded up to Mangan, unlike the previous examples. But again, that is not a big deal. It just depends on the rules by which you play. Okay, so we're going to go back to the EMA score tables, and they do go from 20 to 100 Fu. You really don't need anything past 80, because if you're getting that much Fu, you honestly should be getting more than 2 Han. So I'm just going to cut off those higher Fu values and leave you with the more relevant ones. Alright, so here's a set of scoring tables that you would reference for almost any hand. These include the limit hands on them, although those should be pretty easy to memorize. But it doesn't hurt to have them on here just in case. So once again, we're going to look at our 2 Han 30 Fu example, and we look at the scoring table for if we are not East, and we see that by Tsumo, it lists the numbers 500 and 1000. The 500 references the smaller amount, which the 2 non-East players pay us, and the 1000 references the larger amount, which the player who is East pays us for a Tsumo. And if we look across at the value for Adon, we'll see that it's 2000, just like we calculated before. And then if we go up to the tables for East, we'll see that for a Tsumo, it's 1000, so meaning everyone pays us 1000 for a 2 Han 30 Fu Tsumo. And if we look at the value for Adon, we see that it's 2,900, like we calculated earlier. Again, the value for Adon is like 1 to 400 points less than the value for a Tsumo, but that's just how the rounding works. So I know the scoring tables look a little daunting, but once you learn how to read them, they're really very helpful. And maybe in the future, I'll go over a video that gives you some tips on how to memorize a scoring table, but again, that's not really necessary. And one thing I want to cover here at the end of the video is the effect of the honba on the score of the hand. As I've said in previous videos, the honba on the board increase the value of a winning hand. When a hand is won by Tsumo, the amount that each player has to pay is increased by 100 times the number of honba on the board. And when a hand is won by Don, the amount that that player who dealt in has to pay is increased by 300 times the number of honba on the board. So essentially, each honba increases the value of a winning hand by 300. And to be clear, this is just added on to the value you pull from the scoring table, so you don't have to do any complicated math or anything. So with our 2 Han 30 Fu example, if we're not East, that would normally be a 500 and 1000 from the other players. But with 1 honba on the board, we would get 600 from the 2 players who are not East, and 1100 from the player who is East. And if we were to win that hand by Don, a 2 Han 30 Fu hand, if you're not East, is 2000 points. So with 1 honba on the board, that would become 2300 points. So it's very simple. You just tack those 300 points on to a Don, or 100 points each to a Tsumo. And also don't forget that the winner of a hand gets to claim any Riichi sticks that are on the board, whether they were from someone declaring Riichi in that game or they were left over from previous games. So to review, we went over how to calculate the base points for your hand based on the Han and Fu values of your hand. And we went over the scoring tables, which are things that you can generally reference whenever you need to and do not have to memorize. We briefly talked about how to score Yakuman hands, but we're going to cover that a little bit more when we get to the video on Yakuman. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment, and thank you for watching.